to the book, and you're not the first man who was given the book by a woman.
Everyone thought the real drama of It Ends With Us was on screen until the lawsuits hit the headlines. What started as a star-studded adaptation of a best-selling novel has spiraled into a web of lawsuits, leaked texts, and behind-the-scenes chaos that's now threatening careers and reputations. But how did we go from a love story to one of the most explosive scandals Hollywood's seen in years? Let's unravel the truth behind the scenes. Because this wasn't just a messy production, it was war. When Colleen Hoover's novel It Ends With Us became a viral phenomenon on Book Talk, it was only a matter of time before Hollywood came knocking. The story, raw and emotional, struck a nerve with millions. So when the adaptation was announced, fans were thrilled. Blake Lively was set to star as Lily Bloom, and Justin Baldoni, known for his heartfelt work behind the camera, would direct. The pairing seemed perfect. Blake brought star power, Justin brought sensitivity, and the story had a built-in audience. But sometimes the perfect setup masks deeper cracks underneath. Initially, everything looked on track. Blake publicly praised the story. Justin appeared committed to honoring the book's themes of trauma, love, and resilience. Colleen Hoover was even involved in the script, adding credibility for fans of the novel. But the optimism didn't last long. By mid-2024, rumors began to swirl that something was off. Rewrites were happening, creative meetings were tense, and suddenly Blake wasn't just acting. She was allegedly stepping into roles that blurred the lines between star, producer, and script doctor. Some insiders claimed Blake was unhappy with the original vision. Others hinted that Colleen Hoover's draft didn't meet Blake's standards, and that the actress began suggesting or demanding changes. Then came the more pointed whispers that Blake had effectively taken over the film, freezing out Justin, reshaping the narrative, and pushing her own version of the story forward. Even more surprising, the suggestion that Ryan Reynolds, Blake's husband, had quietly stepped in to fix parts of the script himself. This was no longer a normal creative process. It was starting to feel like a power struggle. And in Hollywood, that kind of conflict rarely stays behind closed doors for long. Blake may have seen her involvement as elevating the material. Justin may have seen it as being pushed out of his own project. But one thing was becoming clear. Whatever unity existed at the start had crumbled, and the fallout was about to spill out into the public eye, dragging careers, reputations, and even entire media outlets down with it. By the end of summer 2024, everything changed. What began as industry chatter about creative clashes turned into a full-on media firestorm. The tone shifted. Headlines that once read like fanfare now felt ominous. On-set turmoil at It Ends With Us became Lively battles Baldoni over creative control. But it didn't stop there. In the span of just a few weeks, the quiet frustration from the production spilled into the press, and with it came something darker. Allegations of sexual harassment and misconduct on set. Though the initial reports were murky, the implications were clear. Sources close to Blake Lively began speaking anonymously, claiming she had endured a hostile work environment, one that reflected deeper systemic issues. The phrase sexual harassment appeared, not in an official complaint, but whispered through interviews and vague media statements. It was enough to send the story into overdrive. Fans split. Comment sections erupted. And just like that, the public stopped talking about the movie and started talking about the scandal. At the center of the allegations was Justin Baldoni, a director once praised for his sensitivity and emotional intelligence. Now, the narrative had flipped. He was painted as domineering, out of touch, and even predatory. But here's the thing, nothing had been filed. No official complaint, no police report, just suggestion, innuendo, and a growing pile of anonymous leaks. And yet, the damage was already underway. Justin's silence only fueled speculation. Where was his statement? His denial? His defense? Behind the scenes, though, he wasn't sitting still. He was building a case of his own, quietly, methodically, and part of that meant figuring out who was feeding the press. That's when the name Leslie Sloan began to surface. As Blake Lively's longtime publicist, Leslie had powerful media connections. Some suspected she was orchestrating the leak campaign, supplying reporters with carefully curated evidence designed to paint Blake as a victim and Justin as the villain. Then came the most damning development yet: leaked messages. Screenshots allegedly sent from Daily Mail reporters to Justin's legal team revealed direct communications with Leslie, suggesting she was the source behind several negative articles. These weren't just rumors anymore. They were receipts. One exchange showed a reporter trying to distance himself from a piece, claiming he was pressured to include statements Leslie had pushed. Another message implied that the source's narrative kept changing, raising serious doubts about the truth behind the allegations. Even worse, there were suggestions that Blake's team had been rewriting history. One set of leaked texts showed an evolving timeline, one where initial complaints made in August 2024 didn't mention harassment at all, only creative differences. But months later, the same parties began framing the situation as a workplace misconduct issue. Was this a genuine reevaluation or a carefully planned smear campaign? To many, it looked like something deeper, a calculated effort to dismantle Justin's credibility and redirect the film's failures onto his shoulders. Whether or not that was the intent, the result was the same. The public turned. The press took sides. And Justin, once the director of a highly anticipated adaptation, became the center of one of Hollywood's ugliest controversies in years. But what the public didn't yet know was that Justin wasn't planning to fight this in the court of public opinion. He was preparing for something bigger, a lawsuit. And with it, a wave of documents, messages, and behind-the-scenes drama that would challenge everything we thought we knew. As the media frenzy gained traction, it became clear that this wasn't just a legal dispute or creative disagreement. It was a full-blown information war. And like any war, it had generals, strategies, and casualties. At the front lines, Leslie Sloan, Blake Lively's longtime publicist, and the British tabloid powerhouse, the Daily Mail. What once looked like organic backlash now appeared to be a carefully managed campaign, one where headlines weren't reporting the news. They were crafting it. Articles surfaced almost daily. Some painted Blake as a brave advocate pushing back against male control. Others described Justin Baldoni as erratic and outdated, unable to handle a powerful female lead. But deeper analysis revealed a disturbing pattern. Many of these stories cited unnamed sources. Others quoted directly from texts and production conversations that hadn't been made public. The question became unavoidable. Who was leaking? Then came the first major break. A string of text messages between Leslie Sloan and a Daily Mail reporter, James Lasutka, were leaked in court documents. In them, Leslie appeared to feed damaging narratives about Justin's behavior, including unverifiable claims about his conduct on set. The kicker? When pressed about these communications, Leslie denied ever saying anything defamatory. But the text told a different story, and they weren't just suggestive. They were time-stamped, detailed, and pointed. Even more alarming was what followed. After being named in the lawsuit, James, the same reporter whose articles had helped shape the public story, allegedly reached out to Justin's legal team in a panic. In a now viral screenshot, he pleaded to have his name and the Daily Mail's removed from any legal filings, fearing he'd lose his job. The implication? The Daily Mail was pressuring him to stay quiet, possibly even to lie. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. The reporter wasn't a co-conspirator. He was a potential whistleblower. And with that, the illusion of unbiased reporting began to unravel. The PR machinery behind Blake Lively's image, once polished and powerful, was now exposed as potentially manipulative. The public began questioning not only the allegations, but the how they were delivered, how they evolved, and who stood to benefit. Justin's team wasn't silent anymore either. They began presenting their own narrative through carefully selected leaks, claiming that Blake had gone beyond her role as actress, exerting undue influence on the production, pressuring rewrites, and allegedly threatening to withhold promotional efforts unless changes were made. A new picture began to emerge, one where Justin wasn't a villain, but a director caught in a web of influence, spin, and power plays. And in the middle of it all, the audience, left to decipher what was real, what was staged, and whether the truth even mattered in a battle where perception had already become the most dangerous weapon. When Justin Baldoni finally broke his silence, he didn't do it with a social media post or a press interview. He went straight to court. In a move that stunned both the entertainment industry and the public, Justin filed a $400 million defamation lawsuit against Blake Lively, her publicist Leslie Sloan, and yes, even Ryan Reynolds. The claim that they had orchestrated a calculated smear campaign to destroy his career, rewrite the narrative around the film, and seize control of the project by any means necessary. The lawsuit wasn't vague. It was surgical. It included text messages, internal emails, and detailed timelines showing the shift in allegations from creative disputes to sexual harassment narratives. One section focused entirely on the role of the Daily Mail and its reporters, claiming that Leslie Sloan had fed them defamatory stories and that Blake had endorsed the messaging. But perhaps the most damning detail? A direct accusation that Blake and her team had manipulated media outlets, intimidated journalists, and even threatened to withhold access unless the narrative stayed favorable. This wasn't just a fight over a movie. It was about image, power, and career survival. Blake's team quickly fired back. Her lawyers labeled the lawsuit a desperate attempt to silence a woman for speaking up and filed a motion to dismiss. But the damage was already done. Suddenly, headlines were no longer dominated by the film. They were filled with court documents, leaked exhibits, and conflicting declarations. And then came another twist. Ryan Reynolds, who had stayed silent until now, was pulled into the storm. While he wasn't publicly involved in the production, Justin's legal filing claimed that Ryan had influenced rewrites, undermined the director, and aided Blake in removing Justin from creative decisions. His name wasn't just there for drama. It was tied directly to behind-the-scenes decisions that, according to Justin, helped justify the eventual takeover of the project. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail, once thought of as a neutral messenger, found itself in the legal crosshairs. Court filings referenced internal emails, claims of pressured journalists, and an unsettling pattern. The most damaging stories against Justin had no clear sourcing, yet aligned perfectly with the timeline of Blake's evolving legal narrative. The question wasn't just what they reported, but why they reported it the way they did. All the while, the film's legacy began to disintegrate. What was meant to be a touching adaptation of a beloved novel had now become collateral in a war far larger than any script. Careers were hanging in the balance. Reputations were being reshaped not through art, but through affidavits, exhibits, and cease and desist letters. And still, the case was far from settled. Because just when you thought the worst was over, another revelation would surface, casting doubt on sworn declarations, exposing inconsistencies in testimony, and pulling even more names into the fray. The lawsuits were just the beginning. What came next would challenge the boundaries of truth, loyalty, and just how far someone would go to control a narrative. By the time the court filings were unsealed, the public narrative had already shifted. But it wasn't just the lawsuits that turned heads. It was the receipts, screenshots, emails, text messages between reporters and publicists, internal communications from media outlets. All of it painted a damning picture. What the world had been reading for months wasn't organic backlash. It was engineered outrage. In court, Justin Baldoni's legal team laid out a timeline of leaks that aligned almost perfectly with Blake Lively's alleged behind-the-scenes maneuvers. Key pieces of information, quotes, accusations, anonymous sources, appeared in the press just days after heated production meetings or legal threats. And at the center of nearly every leak, Leslie Sloan, Blake's publicist. The documents suggested that Leslie was feeding information to reporters to control the narrative, often spinning minor disagreements into full-blown character attacks. One article quoted a source close to the production, accusing Justin of shutting down Blake's ideas. Another claimed Blake had to step in and rewrite the script to save it. But those statements were later contradicted by internal production notes, emails, and even cast testimonials. some of which revealed that Colleen Hoover, the original author, had requested Blake scale back her changes, not increase them. And then came the bombshell, a leaked text exchange between James Lasutka, a Daily Mail reporter, and Leslie Sloan. In it, James pleaded to have his name removed from court documents, writing that his job was at risk and that he had only included Leslie's quotes because he was pressured. The implication? The Daily Mail wasn't just reporting a story, they were participating in it. And when the reporter threatened to reveal that Leslie had planted false information, they allegedly threatened to fire him. What started as bad PR had now become something much bigger. It wasn't just about a tarnished image. It was about manipulation, coercion, and possibly even perjury. Leslie had repeatedly denied feeding defamatory stories, but the messages suggested otherwise. She had called Justin an abuser, accused him of being chauvinistic, and claimed he had sidelined Blake and Colleen Hoover, all without evidence. And when those stories were published, Blake's team publicly distanced themselves, all while privately pushing the exact same narrative. What's worse? Some of the stories were reportedly written under false pretenses, framed as balanced reporting when they were actually front-loaded with pre-approved talking points and selective edits. Behind closed doors, Blake's team allegedly reviewed drafts before publication, requested headline changes, and ensured the framing was sympathetic. That kind of editorial control is rare. That kind of influence? Nearly unprecedented. But Justin's team wasn't innocent either. In response to the smear campaign, they allegedly began leaking their own counter-narratives, highlighting Blake's alleged attempts to seize production control, her script rewrites, and even claims that Ryan Reynolds ghost-wrote scenes during the writer's strike. It was a battle of leaks, spin, and strategic silence. And every headline became a grenade, thrown into an already burning room. The fallout? Devastating. Once friendly media outlets began turning cold, public sympathy fractured. Even fans of the book were divided, unsure whom to believe. And through it all, the film's original message about survival, trauma, and healing was completely lost in the noise. What had started as a movie became a case study in how fame, power, and media access can twist reality into whatever narrative you want it to be. But if anyone thought the media war was over, they were wrong. Because as more evidence surfaced and more names were dragged into the light, it became obvious. This wasn't just about a single production. It was about how Hollywood protects its stars and destroys its outliers. In the middle of the escalating legal and media war, the battle lines were no longer just between Blake and Justin. Hollywood began choosing sides, quietly at first, then more visibly. Every public statement, every like on social media, every silence spoke volumes. And as the pressure mounted, the question wasn't just who was telling the truth. It became who would dare take a side. Some came out swinging. Colleen Hoover, the author of It Ends With Us, initially appeared to back Blake Lively's involvement in the adaptation. But as the scandal grew, her tone noticeably shifted. Rumors began circulating that Colleen had been pushed aside during production. Her creative input minimized, her name used for credibility but ignored in execution. She didn't say much publicly, but industry insiders claimed she was deeply disappointed by how the adaptation spiraled. Meanwhile, Blake's team attempted to rally support. A few fellow actresses and influencers expressed solidarity, liking vague posts about women's voices and standing strong in the face of harassment. But even then, the backing felt carefully measured, more symbolic than specific. No A-listers made direct statements. No organizations issued formal letters of support. Behind closed doors, many were watching, but few were willing to risk their own reputations to speak up. Justin, on the other hand, began gaining quiet but meaningful support from unexpected places. A handful of crew members from the set spoke anonymously to media outlets, suggesting that the environment was not nearly as toxic as Blake's camp claimed, and that, if anything, Justin had been undermined constantly during production. One source even claimed Blake had rewritten scenes without consulting the director, essentially steamrolling creative decisions. But the most surprising ally? James Lasutka, the same Daily Mail reporter who had been at the center of the leaks. Though his public declaration was written carefully, his internal text told a different story. He repeatedly contradicted Leslie Sloan's version of events, insisting that he had been pressured to write specific narratives, and even calling Leslie a liar in multiple messages. Though he never gave a public interview, his private communications became one of the most potent weapons in Justin's legal arsenal. There were also signs of tension within Blake's own circle. Whispers began circulating about internal friction between her camp and the media teams managing the fallout. One source suggested that even Ryan Reynolds was becoming uneasy with how deep things had gone, particularly once his name entered the legal filings. Whether true or not, the perception alone was enough to cause cracks in public support. And then came SAG-AFTRA. The actors' union released a brief but pointed statement condemning toxic work environments and supporting the right of every actor to feel safe and heard. While they didn't name names, the timing and tone were clear. For Blake, it was a moment of validation. But for others, it raised eyebrows. Was the union taking sides? Or simply reacting to pressure from one of Hollywood's most powerful PR teams? With every new endorsement or refusal to speak, momentum shifted. Support became currency, and silence became a strategy. In the absence of concrete facts, the court of public opinion was now being shaped by whispers, alignments, and calculated alliances. But this wasn't just about reputations anymore. Careers were on the line. And as new filings prepared to enter the courtroom, everyone watching was left with the same uneasy question. When the people with the power to speak out stay quiet, what does that really say about where their loyalties lie? By the time the lawsuit reached the courtroom, the story had already been rewritten a dozen times in the public eye. But the legal arena was different. There were no PR spin cycles, no carefully edited statements, no anonymous sources. Just evidence, timelines, witnesses, declarations under penalty of perjury. And when the gavel dropped, the spectacle gave way to something far more dangerous for both sides: the truth, or at least something close to it. Justin Baldoni's legal team arrived prepared. Their filings were dense, chronological, and filled with supporting materials: emails, text exchanges, early production memos. They presented a narrative that was both strategic and personal, a story of a director who had been slowly pushed out of his own film, maligned by the very team that once championed him, and then defamed in the press through targeted leaks and half-truths. They highlighted contradictions in the timeline. Why, for example, had Blake's team never filed a formal harassment complaint during or immediately after filming? Why had the allegations only emerged after she allegedly gained creative control? Why had her publicist, Leslie Sloan, told one version of events to reporters in August and another version in court by December? And most critically, why did James Lasutka, the journalist at the center of it all, text that Leslie had lied and pressured him to run stories, only to later file a declaration walking all of it back? That last point became a legal earthquake. Justin's attorneys argued that James was pressured, possibly even threatened, into reversing his statement. They cited a message he'd sent just weeks earlier, begging to be excluded from the filings and stating his job was in jeopardy. It raised an explosive question. Had the Daily Mail, or someone else, leaned on him to recant? And if so, how much of the public narrative had been built on coerced silence? On the other side, Blake Lively's legal team fought hard to dismiss the case. They called it retaliatory, baseless, and an attempt to silence a woman speaking out. They emphasized Blake's spotless public image, her philanthropic work, her decades in the spotlight without scandal. And they leaned heavily on the First Amendment, arguing that critical press coverage, even if damaging, wasn't the same as defamation. But as the hearings dragged on, the clean lines began to blur. Certain claims in Blake's defense didn't quite align with earlier media statements. Texts revealed her team had far more editorial input over coverage than they admitted. And some of the harshest quotes about Justin, they couldn't be tied to anonymous sources anymore because they were now attributed directly to Leslie Sloan, or in some cases, Blake herself. As the judge began sorting through the conflicting motions, Requests to strike evidence, seal exhibits, and dismiss counts. The legal tide began to turn. A few minor claims were thrown out, but the most serious ones, defamation, intentional interference, and reputational harm, remained. That meant depositions were coming. And with them, the one thing everyone had tried to avoid, being forced to speak under oath on the record. Hollywood thrives on image, but depositions don't. If things moved forward, Blake, Leslie, Ryan Reynolds, and possibly even key executives from Wayfarer Studios would be required to testify, that meant timelines would be scrutinized, motives questioned, and memories cross-examined. Already, reports were surfacing that legal teams were scrambling, reviewing every email, every call log, every interview. Rumors swirled that settlement offers had been quietly floated and rejected. Both sides were digging in, because at this point, it wasn't just about winning. It was about surviving. And while the world waited for the next hearing date, one thing was certain. This courtroom drama was far from over. In fact, the most damaging revelations might still be sealed, waiting to be unlocked by a subpoena, a deposition, or a single witness who finally decides to speak. When the dust began to settle, no one emerged unscathed. Not Blake, not Justin, not Ryan, not even the media outlets that had once proudly controlled the narrative. What was supposed to be a heartfelt adaptation of a best-selling romance novel had mutated into one of the most contentious entertainment scandals in recent memory. One that exposed not just personal conflict, but the machinery of modern fame itself. It Ends With Us premiered under a shadow. Box office numbers were respectable, but fan reactions were split. Some couldn't separate the story on screen from the real-life chaos of it. Others saw the film as a casualty of ego, PR warfare, and unchecked power. Even critics, normally focused on cinematography, acting, and pacing, couldn't avoid referencing the controversy. The drama had become part of the product. For Blake Lively, the damage control continues. Though her core fan base remains loyal, industry insiders note a subtle shift. Fewer brand endorsements, tighter interview conditions, a noticeable chill from some former collaborators. As for Leslie Sloan, whispers suggest her behind-the-scenes influence may be dwindling. Some reporters, once eager to quote her sources, now keep their distance. In the court of media credibility, trust is everything, and hers may have been quietly revoked. Justin Baldoni, once written off as a casualty of bad press, is experiencing a strange kind of vindication. As more of the case details entered the public sphere, public opinion began to swing. Not fully, not dramatically, but enough to change the tone. People started asking harder questions about the timing of the accusations, the way stories were seeded, the ethical lines crossed by those behind the headlines. Whether Justin can fully recover his reputation is still unclear. But one thing is certain, he's no longer silent and he's no longer alone. And what about the rest? The reporters pulled into the storm, the executives trying to dodge subpoenas, the studio caught between protecting talent and managing liability. None of them expected a film about love, trauma, and healing to spiral into a legal and reputational inferno. But that's the new Hollywood, where perception is more powerful than truth, and a whisper can do more damage than a headline. As of now, key lawsuits are still pending. Court dates continue to loom, and though some documents have been sealed or redacted, insiders believe more leaks are coming, more revelations, more receipts. Because in a battle like this, no one walks away without scars, and no story stays buried forever. In the end, maybe this wasn't a story about a movie at all. Maybe it was a warning about fame, control, and what happens when image becomes more valuable than integrity. The question now isn't just how this ends, it's who still has something to lose. In a world where stories are shaped by whispers and reputations rise or fall based on who controls the narrative, the truth often gets lost in the noise. What happened behind the scenes of It Ends With Us wasn't just a scandal, it was a mirror. A mirror held up to Hollywood, showing just how easily perception can be bought, loyalty can be twisted, and silence can become a strategy. The movie may have ended, but the real story, it's still unfolding, and the most shocking part might be what hasn't come out yet.